Hey everybody, welcome back to Constitution Regents Review. Remember, as we talked about before, that Starry McStarry Pants is going to help us out with the parts of the Constitution that will help us for multiple choice. And our good friend Larry, he is not known as Kareem, he's going to help us out with the parts that are going to be essays, or good for essays. All right, well, let me tell you, this whole bit about flexibility, it gets both. It gets Starry McStarry Pants and our good friend Larry. Why? Because I've seen a bunch of them for multiple choice, and they're great to use for essays. So let's talk about flexibility. So just like, I don't know, anything in the world that's flexible, it's great because you can bend it and you can mold it and you can do different things with it. I like that. I can't think of an example of something that's flexible right now, but that's okay. So it's the same idea, though, with the Constitution, that we want it to be able to bend and change and stretch. Remember, guys, they wrote the Constitution in 1787. They ratified it in 1789. It's the same Constitution. And that's pretty rare, actually, if you look at other countries around the world. So the fact that it's flexible is very important to us. So it changes with the times. And it's the way that there's several ways that allow it to change with the times. The first is the elastic clause. And with the elastic clause, which, by the way, if we've mentioned it, I think we've mentioned it previously, but let's mention it again. The elastic clause is also known as implied powers. It's also known as the necessary and proper clause. You get strict and loose interpretation. So we talk a lot about the loose interpretation in terms of history because that's where it really is changing. And so great examples that I've seen definitely in the multiple choice is the Bank of the United States and the Louisiana Purchase, but great for essays are the New Deal and the Great Society. So if you guys don't remember, Alexander Hamilton said way back when Washington was president, hey, we need to have a bank, to manage our debt, and nowhere did it say in the Constitution, so he used the elastic clause to be able to have that bank. Thomas Jefferson, he wanted to purchase Louisiana and basically had to give up his strict interpretation to be able to do that. The New Deal, the idea that the government, and the same thing with the Great Society, both the New Deal and the Great Society, the idea that the government's going to take care of people beyond just general safety. Dealing with things like unemployment or Social Security or FDIC or the Securities and Exchange Commission, welfare, Medicare, Medicaid, all those different things. That comes from loose interpretation. Obviously, amendments are changes. That it's basically editing the Constitution. So some great examples are ending slavery, granting suffrage, both in the 15th Amendment to African Americans and the 19th Amendment to women. And then presidential term limits, saying, yeah, you know what, we're not going to let people just keep running and running like FDR did. And then the big one also is judicial interpretation. And if you look at, you have a case like Plessy versus Ferguson that says, yeah, segregation, 2 thumbs up, separate but equal, that's great. And then you have Brown versus Board of Education, which says, yeah, there's no such thing as separate but equal. And so that's an example of where, because you're allowed to interpret and you're allowed to interpret for the changing times, you have one case in the 1890s, another case in the 1950s, that they're able to change that meaning and say, no, segregation is not going to work. All right, so let's talk about what federalism is. Federalism is the division of power between the state and national governments. Oh my God, if you know one definition for the Regents, please know that definition. Because what they'll do is they'll ask you questions. Well, which one is an example of federalism? What is federalism? All these different things. Please, 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 please know that. So we've got 3 major powers here. We've got delegated powers that only the national government can do, like declaring war or coining money. Are there other delegated powers? Yes. But the ones you need to know: coin money, declare war. Concurrent powers are powers that are shared, that both the states can do and the national government. If you work, you know that they both can tax. Okay, you get state taxes taken out, you get national taxes taken out, you even get local taxes taken out. They can make laws. That there are national laws, there are state laws, there are local laws. Again, there are other concurrent powers. Those are the two big ones. And then reserve powers, there's a bunch too that only the states can do. The really big ones that we like to talk about are marriage. Each state has different regulations for that. Licensing is another one, not only like driver's license, but licensing of professionals, for example. I'm licensed to teach in New York, not Connecticut. And probably another really big one would be education would be a really good reserved power to kind of talk about. So there's a bunch, but marriage and licensing are the big ones. All right, so then we have implied powers. As I was just mentioning, they're the same things as they're also known as the necessary and proper clause and the elastic clause, all the same thing. They're used interchangeably on the Regents. Please, please, please know them to be the same thing. Denied powers are powers that no part of government may use. Now let me just tell you, generally, there must have been at some point a time when they talked about denied powers in the multiple choice. But I gotta tell you, it's great to use in an essay if you're talking about Lincoln suspending the writs of habeas corpus during the Civil War. Let's say you have an essay and it's talking about presidential powers and you're giving all this example, and then you pull out the writs of habeas corpus. Man, I'm going to be wanting to give you a ton of points. Just another part of the Constitution that obviously is important, even though it wasn't adopted right when the Constitution was written, it was actually a couple years later. Remember, the Anti-Federalists said, please, 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 add a Bill of Rights, or else we won't ratify it. So we have several amendments here. Now, obviously, there are 10 amendments. I'm not making you memorize them, neither is the Regents. But you should know that basically the first, second, and then the fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, they're kind of known as our civil liberties. So if they have an essay about civil rights, then they're talking about African Americans or women or Native Americans. If we're talking about civil liberties, it's these things like freedom of speech, freedom of press, freedom of religion, your Second Amendment, right to bear arms. I would imagine that might be a big thing on the Regents this year since it's been such a hot topic recently. And then you really do not need to memorize like what each one is for the fourth through eighth. As long as you know that they're the rights of the people who are accused of crimes, I'm pretty happy with that. And then the 10th Amendment, that's what gives us our reserve powers. Nowhere in the Constitution does it say, well, actually, it does. It says all the other things go to the states, but that's the extra part that says, yeah, we have reserve powers. We also have a thing called the Unwritten Constitution. Why? To make things more complicated. Actually, no, it's basically, it's things they're by tradition. It's sort of like, why does your family, I don't know, eat whatever kind of weird thing they eat on a holiday? Because we've always done it. Well, it's the same sort of thing with the Constitution. We do certain things because we've always done it. It may as well be part of the Constitution, but it's not actually technically part of the Constitution. So one of them is the two-term presidency. Washington ran for 2 terms, went home and died. Jefferson ran for 2 terms, went home and died. And it kind of kept going like that for a long time until our good friend FDR. And he ran once, he ran twice, he ran 3 times, he ran 4 times, and then he died. And afterwards they passed an amendment saying, yeah, let's not do that anymore. So the Regents likes to be tricky. So if they're talking about before FDR, it's Unwritten Constitution. If they're talking about after FDR, it's a constitutional amendment, the reason why it's a 2-term presidency. Cabinet, it's a precedent or an example set for the future by Washington. Political parties, that's something that Hamilton and Jefferson, they were arguing over our good friend the bank, and Hamilton had that loose interpretation of the Constitution, Jefferson had the strict interpretation. Some people were like, Hamilton, he's our dude. And other guys were like, no, I like Jefferson. And next thing you know, you get political parties. By the way, they were the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans, also known as the Republicans. But not today's Republicans. Don't worry about that. Congressional committees. Honestly, we don't talk about that much in class, but our good friend the Regents likes to throw that in the mix. So yeah, in Congress, in order to make all the bills that they make, They have committees that do extra research on them. So if it's a bill dealing with healthcare, it goes to the health committee. It's not written anywhere. It's just what happens. And then judicial review. No, it's not written in the Constitution. It was established by our good friend John Marshall in Marbury versus Madison. And that's it for today, guys. I hope you study bunches and bunches. See you next time for Supreme Court.